between the sands of memory. A name seemed long buried. Yet the scroll of history never forgets the trembling footsteps of a people enslaved. Beneath the Egyptian moon, the groans of thousands making bricks without rest rose like a song with no melody, and the heavens held their breath as though awaiting a new sign. A throne glittered in gold, but the blood of infants turned the river into a silent grave. Pharaoh spoke, and his decree was like iron. Every Hebrew male child must be cast into the Nile. The river, once worshipped as the giver of life, became a devouring blade, swallowing the future of an entire people. Each wave was like ink upon a hidden record, each current a witness against the empire's pride. The earth groaned, the waters testified, the heavens were silent. But that silence was not emptiness. It was a sealed scroll, waiting to be broken open. In a narrow hut, a mother cradled her newborn. For 3 months she hid him, heartbeat aligned with the pounding boots of soldiers outside. When his cries grew too loud, she knew she must release him. But she did not surrender him to oblivion. She entrusted him to the unseen hand that could carve a path through judgment. She wove a basket of reeds, sealed it with pitch, and placed her son upon the water, a miniature ark, afloat on the flood of imperial cruelty. Her hands let go, but her eyes clung to him. The elder sister stood at a distance, her gaze fierce as fire, guarding the little vessel as it drifted between reeds. The wind bowed the grass, the river carried him, as though all creation bent itself toward a hidden destiny. A company of royal women descended to the river. Their laughter chimed like silver bells against the sound of the stream. Among the reeds, the basket lodged. The lid shifted. A cry broke forth, a cry small in sound but immense in meaning, a trumpet blast disguised in the voice of an infant. The princess looked, and her heart shattered the edict of her father. Compassion, soft as wax before flame, bent the iron law of Egypt. In that moment, the empire's script cracked. They named him Moses, drawn out of the waters, drawn out of judgment, drawn out for a purpose no king could foresee. His name itself was prophecy, a map inked before his journey began. He grew between two worlds, the gilded halls where hieroglyphs sang praises to gods of stone, and the dusty fields where straw clung to blood on the backs of slaves. These two rivers of experience met within him, forming a whirlpool unseen by those around him. Consider this. Egypt carved its deities into stone, believing power lay in what the eye could behold. But Israel, alone among the nations, forbade images, for their God was the invisible one who spoke. One world crowned kings with titles of divinity. The other whispered of a covenant written not on stone, but on memory. Moses lived between these two languages, the glitter of idols and the silence of an unseen presence. At night, when the palace lay still, the wind carried the smell of river mud through marble corridors, reminding him of a question unresolved. Who am I? One day he went out and saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. In a single moment, history tilted. He struck, and the oppressor fell. Sand swallowed the body like closing eyelids. Silence. But silence does not erase. It records. The next day, He tried to reconcile two Hebrews quarreling. Their words cut him deeper than Pharaoh's lash. "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" That sentence buried the prince he had been. The throne could not save him, nor could his people trust him. He fled. The wilderness opened before him, vast, merciless, and empty. Yet the desert is the classroom of those destined to hear the voice of heaven. There, noise is stripped away until only conscience remains. Moses arrived in Midian and sat beside a well, a place where destinies often shift in the history of the covenant. At wells, patriarchs met their brides. At wells, promises were turned into lineage. Here, once more, history bent. 7 daughters of a priest were driven back by rough shepherds. Moses rose, drove the men away, and drew water for the flock. No sword, no crown, only a simple act, yet simple acts can turn the hinges of history. He married Zipporah, the little bird, and lived as a shepherd, far from the roar of palaces. Nights by the fire, he remembered marble columns, blood-soaked straw, and the sand hiding a corpse. Within, 2 pulses fought, guilt and memory. Then came the day he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness, to the mountain of God, Horeb, where stone rose like unopened tablets. There he saw it, a bush of flame, yet unconsumed. Fire that burned without devouring, light that revealed without destroying. A paradox, a sign, a seal breaking. Moses whispered, "I will turn aside and see this great sight." The turning aside was itself the pivot of history. Moses, Moses. His name called twice, like the 2 sides of a bridge stretching into the future. He answered, "Here I am." The voice thundered, "Do not come closer. Remove your sandals, for the place where you stand is holy ground." The ground was not holy by geography, but by presence. Wherever the invisible one stood, dust itself became altar. Moses hid his face, afraid to gaze upon God. Fear and calling intertwined. "I have seen the misery of my people. I have heard their cries. I know their suffering. I have come down to deliver them. Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh." 3 strokes of the epic drum. They cried. Heaven was silent. The covenant answered. The command fell like a hammer upon stone. Moses trembled. "Who am I, that I should go?" The old question returned, but the voice shifted the axis. "I will be with you. Not who you are, but who I am with you. Not strength, but presence. Not the mighty, but the willing." "What is your name?" he asked. Not to conjure, but to cling. And the fire spoke the name unbound by idols. "I am who I am." Not a title etched in stone, not a deity bound in temples, but a verb, being, living, becoming. A name that is existence itself, a name to unroll the scroll of time. Proof was given, a staff turned serpent, a hand diseased then restored, water turned to blood. Not tricks, but creation itself bowing to its master. Each sign was a seal broken, a reminder that nature listens when its author speaks. Moses, once a prince, once a murderer, once a shepherd in hiding, stood now as the one chosen to speak with God face to face. From the fire of Sinai, the next act was ready to blaze, an act that would make the mightiest empire bow before the cries of slaves. Moses descended from the mountain with fire still burning in his eyes. Yet the desert winds carried more than the smell of sheep and dust. They carried a new weight upon his shoulders. The voice that spoke from the bush had not vanished with the flames. It clung to his soul like a seal pressed into wax. He was no longer simply a fugitive, no longer merely a shepherd. He was the chosen mouthpiece of the I Am, the trembling bearer of a word destined to fracture empires. He returned to Midian, to the tent where Zipporah tended their sons, and told her of the vision. His lips struggled to find words. His voice cracked under the gravity of the task. Yet the truth could not be hidden. He was to confront Pharaoh, to wrest a people from chains with nothing but a staff and a promise. Who would believe such a tale? Even his own heart faltered. Yet obedience does not wait for confidence. The desert had stripped him of every weapon save one, the presence that had declared itself eternal. With Zipporah and his children, he began the long road back toward Egypt. Every step felt like a return to judgment. Every horizon a reminder of the corpse buried in sand years ago. Yet above the desert silence, the memory of the fire's voice pulsed. I will be with you. That was enough to turn his feet forward. And there, along the way, another figure approached, his brother Aaron, sent by the very God who spoke from flame. They embraced, two streams of blood reunited, carrying both fear and hope. Together they would stand before the throne that enslaved their people. Two voices, one hesitant, one bold, yet both bound to the same commission. The scroll of destiny was unfolding, and their names were written across its lines. When they entered Egypt, the air was thick with incense and sweat. The palaces rose like mountains of stone, covered with hieroglyphs that praised gods who devoured the weak. Pharaoh sat high upon his throne, as though he were eternity incarnate. Into that hall of marble and gold, two weather-worn shepherds walked, staffs in their hands, sand still clinging to their robes. They carried no weapon but a word. The contrast itself was a thunderclap, heaven's defiance dressed in dust. They spoke, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." The words rang out like a hammer against bronze. Silence filled the chamber, then laughter. Pharaoh leaned back, disdain dripping from his tongue. Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. In those words lay the arrogance of an empire, a heart that believed stone could silence heaven. The contest had begun, not between two men and a king, but between covenant and empire, between I Am and the idols of Egypt. Each plague that followed was not merely punishment, but revelation, each a blow against the gods of the Nile, the sky, the fields, the flesh. The river turned to blood. The very deity Egypt adored became a scarlet witness to judgment. Frogs poured into chambers, invading beds and bowls, as though mocking the idols of fertility. Gnats rose from the dust, flies swarmed, pestilence struck the cattle, boils disfigured the flesh of men and beast alike. At each sign, Pharaoh's heart hardened. What is hardness but stone trying to resist fire? Yet every blow cracked another layer. The heavens did not simply punish, they unveiled. Egypt's gods were unmasked as powerless, their silence echoing louder with every plague. Then came hail and thunder, the sky itself breaking open. Fire ran along the ground, mingling with ice, a storm against the fields that Pharaoh's gods were said to protect. Darkness followed, thick, tangible, oppressive, a night that could be felt by the skin. For 3 days Egypt groped in blindness, while Israel had light in their dwellings. The contrast was a prophecy written not in ink but in shadow and flame, covenant light against imperial night. Still Pharaoh's pride clung to its throne. Still he refused. Until the final blow was declared, the firstborn of Egypt would fall. Judgment would move like a shadow through the land, touching every house unless the mark of blood stood upon its door. A lamb without blemish was to be slain, its blood painted upon doorposts. A feast of haste, bread without leaven, and bitter herbs, a memorial carved into time itself. That night, the destroyer passed through. The cries of Egypt rose like a storm of anguish, yet where the blood marked wood, death could not enter. The covenant remembered its people. Pharaoh yielded. Chains were loosened, doors flung open. Israel departed, not as fugitives, but as a host led by a hand unseen. Gold and silver were pressed into their hands, as though Egypt itself paid tribute to the God it had defied. They marched into the wilderness, a sea of people carrying memories of whips and the taste of unleavened bread. Before them, a pillar of cloud by day, of fire by night, the covenant in visible form, guiding, guarding, declaring, "I am is with you." But Egypt's pride does not die easily. Pharaoh pursued with chariots and horsemen, the roar of wheels shaking the ground, the glitter of spears like teeth of death. Before Israel lay the sea, behind them the army. Trapped between water and blade, fear rose like a flood. Yet Moses stood, staff in hand, and declared words that would echo for millennia. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The sea trembled. The wind howled. Waters rose as walls, a pathway carved where none existed. Israel walked through on dry ground, the depths transformed into a corridor of deliverance. Egypt pursued, but the covenant was no ally of arrogance. The waters returned, swallowing chariots, drowning pride. On the shore, the people turned, and for the first time, their eyes saw not just an oppressor fallen, but a God revealed in power. Miriam lifted her tambourine, and the women danced, their feet striking dust into the air like sparks of joy. A song erupted, ancient yet new. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. The epic drumbeat of history resounded, covenant triumph, empire undone, slaves reborn as a nation. But deliverance was not the end. It was the beginning of a wilderness where thirst, hunger, and doubt would gnaw. It was the beginning of Sinai, where thunder and fire would once more descend. It was the beginning of a man who would climb into smoke and cloud to speak with God face to face. The scroll was still turning. The seals were not yet all broken. Moses' journey had only begun. The wilderness received them like a vast, breathing beast ribs of rock, lungs of wind, a mouth of heat. Freedom tasted like dust at first. 3 days from the sea, the water they found was bitter, a pool that reflected only their thirst. The people murmured, and the sound of complaint scraped against the air as if knives were sharpened on stone. Moses cried out, and a piece of wood was shown to him. He cast it into the waters, and the bitterness sweetened, as if creation itself could be rewritten by the syllables of the covenant. They moved on to Elim, where palms rose like green torches and springs burst from the ground. A brief reprieve, a whisper that the wilderness was not sovereign. But hunger followed. In the wilderness of sin, bellies ached and memory lied. Egypt's pots simmered in their minds, perfumed with nostalgia. Freedom, newly born, staggered under the weight of craving. Then, at the edge of dawn, dew lay upon the ground. When it lifted, a fine flake remained, delicate as frost upon the sand. They asked, "What is it?" And the question became its name, manna, a daily riddle whose answer was faith. Bread fell with the sunrise and melted with the sun. Abundance demanded restraint, and hoarding bred worms overnight, as if greed itself had a smell. In the evening, quail dropped from the sky like a net cast by an invisible hand. The map of providence etched itself upon their routines, each morning a gift, each seventh day a silence. Thirst returned at Rephidim, the kind that dries words to ash. Quarrel rose like smoke. They tested the name of the one who had brought them out. Moses stood before rock, old as the bones of the earth, and struck. Water broke forth as from a wound, clear, cold, relentless, a river born within stone. The ground drank, the people drank, the livestock drank, and the rock remembered. The wilderness took note that the author of rivers could write streams into granite with a single blow. But the desert had teeth. Amalek came, raiders like a sandstorm with spears. Israel had barely learned to walk as a free people when war fell upon them. Joshua led men to the ridge, the raw edge of a new identity. Moses ascended another height, not to strike, but to raise his hands. When his arms were lifted, Israel prevailed. When they sagged, Amalek surged. So Aaron and Hur stood at his sides, stone beneath him, hands upheld till sunset. The battle below was mirrored by a battle above, the line of victory traced not across sand but through the posture of a prophet. When the sun died in blood at the horizon, Amalek broke. An altar was built, and its name was a sentence. The Lord is my banner, not cloth, but presence as a standard. Then, to the camp came Jethro, priest of Midian and father-in-law, drawn by rumor of plagues and sea roads. He watched Moses sit from morning till night, the people streaming like tributaries with grievances and knots of living. Wisdom, old and desert-tested, spoke, "You will wear yourself and the people out. Appoint able men, fearing God, hating bribes, to carry the smaller burdens. Let the hard cases come to you." The advice was simple, the architecture profound, justice braided with humility, shared weight instead of solitary collapse. A priest of Midian and a prophet of Israel nodded over a sketch of governance the wind could not erase. The journey bent toward Sinai. The mountain grew upon the horizon like a throne rising from earth, its flanks black with ancient fire. Camp was pitched before it, and the people trembled without understanding why. Moses climbed. The summit vanished into cloud as if heaven had stooped to sit upon stone. A voice called from the thick darkness where God was, and its words shaped a nation's spine. You have seen what I did to Egypt, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The promise was not land alone, nor safety, nor bread. It was nearness, vocation, identity signed by an infinite hand. Boundaries were set around the mountain. The people were told to wash, to wait, to be ready. On the third day, the morning broke like a drum. Thunder spoke in multiple tongues. Lightning stitched the sky, and a thick cloud sank upon the summit. A trumpet blast swelled, not wrought by human breath, but driven by wind older than the world. The mountain smoked because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its stones shook as if the heart of the earth beat too fast. The people stood at the foot, and fear forced them to the edges of themselves. Moses spoke, and God answered with a voice. The summit burned, the boundary held. And then the words that would cut history like a plow. No idols. No names of God twisted for leverage. No theft of Sabbaths. Honor father and mother. No murder. No adultery. No theft. No false witness. No coveting. Each commandment was a star pinned to the firmament of ethics. Yet none were cold. They burned with the heat of the one who gave them. It was not a code of empire, gilded and indifferent. It was relational law, a grammar for loving the invisible and the neighbor made of dust and breath. The same voice that split the sea now braided justice with mercy in 10 blazing lines. The people begged that the voice not speak to them directly again. The sound had reached their bones and rattled their secrets. They asked for a mediator, and in that request the shape of Moses' calling grew clear. To step into fire and return bearing speech. To ascend into cloud and descend with instruction. He entered the darkness where God was. The mountain swallowed him like a mouth. Days lengthened into 40. Lightning stitched the night while Moses stood within the storm's quiet center, receiving a pattern, a tabernacle not of marble but of movement, a sanctuary that could walk. He was shown measurements and materials, acacia wood, gold and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarn, cherubim woven into curtains like thoughts into dreams. An ark to hold testimony, not a coffin of relics, but a throne's footstool, rings and poles making it forever portable, as if holiness refused to be trapped. A mercy seat with overshadowing wings, where blood would speak louder than sin. A table for bread of faces, lampstands fashioned like almond blossoms bearing 7 flames, a perpetual light in a world of shifting night. He was given garments for Aaron, breastpiece with 12 stones, each a tribe set like a cosmos upon the chest, ephod, robe, turban, a man dressed not in status but in symbols. Bells at the hem, pomegranates stitched between sound and fruitfulness accompanying every step into the inner court. He heard recipes for incense whose smoke would write prayers into air, formulas for anointing oil that would mark things as more than things. He learned of altars, basins, sacrifices, and the steady river of blood and ash that would tell a story. Sin is heavy. Atonement is costly. Mercy has a scent. He listened as the voice outlined a rhythm for time, Sabbaths as moorings driven into the calendar, a weekly rebellion against Pharaoh within the soul. Work and stop, build and breathe, create and then cease, the image of the Creator engraved not in stone alone, but in the pulse of days. He heard warnings against idolatry sharpened like swords. Do not fashion the invisible after anything that crawls or soars. Do not bow to the work of your hands and call it divine. The same hands that struck rock for water were now to be consecrated for service, not sculpting gods, but raising a tent where the true God would dwell. Below, the people waited. Days without the man who spoke for heaven felt like standing on the lip of a cliff with eyes closed. Fear brewed impatience. Impatience curdled into demand. They gathered to Aaron, a river seeking any channel. Make us gods who shall go before us. Earrings were torn from lobes. Gold poured like molten memory into a mold of forgetfulness. A calf emerged, not a beast only, but a symbol tugged from Egypt's pantheon, an image that promised control, a god you can point to, parade around, and placate. They called it the god who brought them up from Egypt. They named a festival. They rose early to feast. Dancing and shouting climbed the air, a fire of their own making licking at the boundary of holiness. On the mountain, the voice shifted, not thunder now, but grief. Go down, for your people, whom you brought up, have corrupted themselves. It was a devastating grammar, as though the covenant shoved back, exposing the wound. They have turned quickly. They have bowed to what they made. A consuming wrath was spoken of, a wiping clean of names from the book of breath. And Moses, who had once feared to speak, now pleaded with words like water against flame. He argued from the promises made to fathers long dead, from the reputation of the name among the nations. He stood in the breach, a thin line between justice and annihilation, and dared to ask for mercy. He descended with stone tablets in his arms, work of God, writing of God, the law not merely heard but held. Joshua met him with the report of noise, not victory, not defeat, but a wildness in the camp. As they approached, the calf gleamed in the sun, and the dance spun like a whirlwind around emptiness. Moses' anger flared like Sinai itself. The tablet shattered at the mountain's foot, covenant broken in symbol as it had been broken in deed. He burned the calf, ground it to powder, scattered it upon water, and made them drink, a bitter draught of their own making. He turned to Aaron, whose fear had sculpted acquiescence, and the brother mumbled excuses. The people are set on evil. The fire did it. It simply came out. But lies evaporate before the heat of holiness. Moses stood at the gate of the camp and drew a line with words. Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me. A hard, terrible justice followed, the cost of idolatry spelled out in names and blood. The day closed with gravity thick upon the air. Yet morning carried Moses up again, back into the smoke, back into the darkness where God was. He bore not tablets now, but a plea. If you will forgive their sin, me. But if not, blot me out of your book which you have written. It was an almost impossible sentence, the heartbeat of a shepherd willing to be erased for his flock. The voice answered with a complicated mercy. The guilty would bear their guilt, a plague would visit, but the story would continue. An angel would go before them, and Moses was told to carve new tablets, climb again, and watch as the name passed by. He cut stone, rose before dawn, and waited upon a ledge while the mountain exhaled cloud. The Lord descended in a cloud and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name, the Lord, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping covenant love to thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet by no means clearing the guilty. A paradox as luminous as the bush, fire that does not consume, mercy that does not lie about evil. Moses fell and worshipped, and begged, "Go in the midst of us, even though they were a stiff-necked people." A covenant was renewed, etched again upon stone and upon the skin of time. When Moses came down, his face shone. Light clung to him like a second dawn, and the people drew back, afraid. He veiled his face when he spoke, a man who had carried sunlight behind cloth, a witness to nearness no idol could counterfeit. The mountain's fire had not stayed upon the peak. It had entered a human face. The work began. Bezalel and Oholiab, craftsmen filled with spirit, bent wood and metal to the pattern shown on the mountain. Gold flowed into lampstands, silver into sockets, bronze into altars. Threads of blue, purple, and scarlet twined into curtains, making a movable horizon. The ark took shape, a chest to hold testimony. The mercy seat crowned it with overshadowing wings. A table and its bread, a menorah with 7 eyes of flame, an altar of incense where smoke would write prayers, a larger altar for offering, where blood would insist that sin matters and that something can be done about it. Basins to cleanse hands and feet before stepping where dust is not welcome. Garments stitched, bells sewn, stones set, each piece a syllable in a language of holiness. At last, the tent rose, and a cloud descended. Glory filled the tabernacle like a weight of light, so thick even Moses could not enter for a time. Whenever the cloud lifted, they set out. When it rested, they encamped. Their map was no cartographer's drawing, but a pillar moving across the wilderness, a theology of travel, a liturgy of following. A nation that had known only orders now learned direction. A people that had been driven now were led. And through it all, Moses moved between camp and cloud, between the clamor of human need and the stillness where a voice shaped worlds. He was the hinge, the bridge, the friend of God who entered the tent and spoke as a man speaks with his companion. And when he emerged, the words he carried steadied a restless nation upon the raw edge of promise. The wilderness stretched forward like an endless riddle. Each sunrise revealed only more horizon. Each sunset folded the camp into silence heavy with doubt. Freedom had been dramatic, but survival was ordinary, and ordinary weighed heavier on the soul. Hunger gnawed at them, thirst scraped their throats, and the memory of Egypt, with its food, its routine, even its chains began to taste sweeter than uncertainty. At Sinai, however, the story swelled to another crescendo. The mountain loomed, cloaked in storm. Trumpet blasts rolled from nowhere. Thunder cracked like the voice of creation revisited, and the summit burned with fire as though the sky itself had descended. The people trembled at the foot, unwilling to climb, unwilling even to listen. They begged Moses to go in their place, to speak with God for them. So he ascended into cloud and lightning, stepping into a furnace of presence. There he received the commandments, 10 words like pillars, etched not only into stone but into the marrow of covenant. They were simple yet terrible. No other gods, no idols, no profaning the name, no theft of sacred time. Honor your parents. No murder, no adultery, no stealing, no false witness, no coveting. Each command was a blow against chaos, a star pinned into the sky of human order. And when Moses descended, his arms carried tablets carved by the very breath of God. Yet even as glory burned above, corruption brewed below. Impatience grew into idolatry. Gold melted into a calf, and a festival of madness erupted. Drums beat, voices shouted, bodies whirled around an image drawn from Egypt's memory. At the mountain's foot, covenant fractured before it could even take root. Moses' anger flared like the fire he had just left. He hurled the tablets down, and stone shattered. He ground the calf to dust, scattered it on water, forced the people to drink their sin. Judgment cut through the camp. Still, mercy pulled Moses back up the slope. He pleaded for them, offered even his own life to be blotted out if only they might live. He stood in the breach, fragile flesh interceding before consuming fire. And the Lord passed before him, declaring the name anew, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, yet by no means clearing the guilty. A paradox eternal and fire that does not consume, mercy that does not lie. When Moses descended again, the covenant renewed, his face shone. Skin itself had become mirror, reflecting a glory too bright for eyes unprepared. They recoiled, so he veiled himself, carrying heaven's light behind cloth. From then on, he entered the tent of meeting to speak with God as one speaks with a friend, and when he emerged, his words carried the weight of a voice that split seas and carved mountains. Israel built the tabernacle according to the pattern shown, acacia wood gilded with gold, curtains of blue and scarlet, an ark to hold testimony, a mercy seat overshadowed by cherubim. A lampstand burned perpetual flame. Bread was set in perpetual remembrance. Incense rose like breath into the unseen. And when it was finished, a cloud descended, filling the tent so thickly even Moses could not enter. The glory that had thundered on Sinai now rested in the midst of tents. The invisible had chosen to dwell among dust. Their journey resumed, the pillar of cloud rising by day, the fire standing by night. Whenever it moved, they followed. Whenever it rested, they stayed. Their map was not inked on parchment, but traced in flame and mist. And through it all, Moses walked between two worlds, the cries of a restless people and the silence of a holy God. He was the hinge of covenant, the man who spoke with I am face to face, bearing both the fire of revelation and the weight of intercession. But the wilderness was not finished with them, nor was the covenant complete. Greater storms waited ahead, rebellions yet to come, and on another mountain Moses would beg to see glory unveiled. His story was not yet done. The years in the wilderness became a furnace of testing. Each step forward pressed the people into complaint, and each complaint revealed the fracture lines within their hearts. Bread rained from heaven, small white flakes that tasted like honeyed wafers, yet soon they despised it. Water burst from rock, rivers carved from solid stone, yet thirst returned with every sunrise. They remembered Egypt not as bondage but as banquets, and memory itself became a snare. Moses bore the weight of their voices. From dawn till dusk, he judged disputes, answered grievances, endured accusations that he had led them only to die in barren land. The burden bent him low until his father-in-law counseled him to share the load, to appoint elders who would bear the strain beside him. Leadership multiplied, yet still the people's restlessness grew. When they reached the edge of promise, spies were sent to search the land. They returned with fruit so large it bent poles, proof of abundance. But they also returned with fear, cities fortified, giants towering, enemies strong. 10 voices sowed despair. 2 voices called for faith. The people chose fear. They wept. They clamored to return. They even sought another leader to guide them back to Egypt's shadows. At that moment, the land itself slipped from their hands. Judgment came. A generation would fall in the wilderness, their bones scattered like markers on the sand. Only their children would see Canaan, and only Joshua and Caleb would enter from among the spies. Moses tore his heart in intercession again, pleading that the nations would not mock God's name. Mercy granted life, but discipline remained. And so the long wandering began, years measured not by victories but by funerals. Time itself became a circle of graves, and each mound of stones marked the cost of disbelief. Rebellion flared again and again. Korah and his followers rose, accusing Moses of exalting himself. The earth answered them, splitting open, swallowing their tents, their families, their possessions into a cavern of judgment. Fire consumed the rest, leaving only smoking ash as warning. Even Aaron's staff, once a dead branch, budded almond blossoms to silence dispute, a living sign that leadership was not grasped but given. Even Miriam, sister and prophetess, raised her voice against Moses, and leprosy bloomed across her skin. Only Moses' prayer turned her back from exile. Again and again, he interceded for those who accused him, carrying wounds not on his skin but in his spirit. At Meribah, however, the burden broke him. Once more the people cried for water. Once more the rock stood silent. God commanded him to speak, but anger surged hotter than obedience. He struck the rock twice with his staff, and water gushed out, abundant as mercy. But his disobedience was noted in heaven. The man who had shattered Egypt's pride, who had spoken with God on the mountain, would not enter the land of promise. He would see it from afar, but his feet would not touch its soil. Still, The journey pressed on. Serpents slithered through the camp, their venom burning like fire. Cries of repentance rose, and a bronze serpent was lifted on a pole. Whoever looked at it lived. Victory came over kings, lands captured east of the Jordan, promises taking shape. Yet always the shadow of mortality hung over Moses, the leader who walked nearer to God than any before, but who bore the cost of anger in a single moment. As the years waned, Moses began to speak long into the nights. His words became sermons, his sermons became covenant, his covenant became the book of remembrance. He recited law, repeated promises, warned of idolatry, sang of blessing and curse. His voice, aged and cracked, thundered with urgency. Life or death, blessing or curse, choose life. On the plains of Moab, the story bent toward its end. The people stood ready to cross, Joshua at their head, the Jordan glimmering like a blade of light. And Moses turned his eyes to another mountain, Nebo, where destiny waited like a sealed scroll. But before the summit, before the farewell, there remained one more unveiling of mystery, one last encounter between man and God, face to face. He climbed Mount Nebo in silence. The wind scraped across the ridges, carrying with it the dust of 40 years. Below, the Jordan wound like a silver thread, and beyond it stretched the land long promised, valleys green with grain, hills swollen with vineyards, cities glinting like jewels in the sun. From that height, Moses saw it all, the inheritance he had carried in words and hope, now displayed before his fading eyes. There was no crown waiting, no triumphal procession, no throne built from conquest. Only the gaze of God and the sweep of horizon. He stood as both shepherd and exile, the one who had led but would not enter, the mediator who had given everything yet still carried the mark of frailty. The paradox of glory and loss pressed against him. The voice of the Lord broke the stillness. This is the land I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over. The promise fulfilled, yet withheld. A vision granted, yet not possession. And there, on Nebo's height, Moses breathed his last. No hand of man buried him, no procession mourned him. God himself took the body, hid it in a grave no eye could find, shrouded the location in mystery. The greatest prophet of Israel vanished into silence, leaving only memory and covenant behind. His grave became not a place of pilgrimage, but a secret sealed by heaven. Yet his story did not end in dust. Generations later, on another mountain, he appeared again. With Elijah beside him, Moses stood in light, speaking with the sun whose face blazed brighter than Sinai's fire. The lawgiver, who once veiled his face from Israel, now unveiled stood beside the one who embodied every word of covenant. The man who saw promise from afar now beheld its fulfillment in flesh. Thus the legacy of Moses lingers as paradox and prophecy. He was raised in the house of Pharaoh but chose slavery's God. He shattered Egypt yet was shattered by anger. He spoke face to face with I am yet could not cross the Jordan. He died alone, yet stood again in glory. He was hidden in burial, yet his voice still speaks wherever covenant is remembered. And the people he led, restless, stubborn, frail, carried his memory like fire. They mourned him 30 days, then turned their eyes to Joshua, the successor chosen, the servant who had long lingered at the tent of meeting. But the shadow of Moses lay over every law, every psalm, every prophecy that followed. His words became scripture. His life became a hinge. His story became the rhythm of a nation's soul. From the reeds of the Nile to the fire of Sinai, from the endless wilderness to Nebo's silent summit, Moses' journey traced the arc of revelation itself. He was the friend of God, the man who spoke face to face. And the covenant he carried did not end with his death. It opened like a scroll, unrolling through generations, whispering that the story was not yet finished. That promise still waited for its final fulfillment. The mountain kept his secret. The people carried his name. And heaven remembered his voice. The memory of Moses did not fade into silence. His shadow lingered over Israel like a mountain on the horizon, shaping law, shaping worship, shaping imagination. Every generation after him recited his words as though they were fire still burning. Children grew up hearing the story of a basket on the Nile, of seas splitting, of Sinai blazing, of wilderness discipline, of a leader who walked into the cloud and returned carrying commandments like thunder turned into stone. The scribes would speak of him as the one who knew God face to face. Prophets would measure their calling against his. If they did not stand in the counsel of the Lord as Moses did, they stood as echoes, not origins. Kings were reminded that their throne rested on the law of Moses. Priests read his words as they sprinkled blood and lit incense. Farmers whispered his blessings and curses over their fields. Soldiers carried his covenant into battle. Every corner of Israel's life bore his fingerprints. But his memory was not gentle. It carried both promise and weight. The covenant he mediated demanded loyalty. Disobedience would bring curse, exile, scattering. His words were not relics but living judgments, still sharp, still burning. They were scrolls that would not close. To remember Moses was to feel the weight of fire. Yet there was also mystery. His grave could not be found. No shrine marked his resting place. Unlike the kings who built monuments, unlike the nations who carved gods into stone, Israel had no tomb to guard, no relic to parade. Moses vanished into secrecy, a reminder that glory belonged not to man but to the God who buries his servant himself. Legends swirled. Some whispered angels contended for his body. Some said he was hidden for a day yet to come. The absence of his grave became as loud as the presence of his law. And then, centuries later, the silence cracked. On a mountain bathed in light, Jesus of Nazareth stood transfigured, his face shining like the sun, his garments blazing white. And beside him, Moses. The lawgiver no longer veiled, no longer distant, but alive in glory, speaking with the one who was the Word made flesh. The man who once pleaded to see God's glory now beheld it unveiled. Sinai's fire found its fulfillment in the light of the sun. For those who saw it, Peter, James, and John, it was terror and wonder. The greatest figures of Israel's memory, Moses and Elijah, appeared not as statues of the past but as witnesses alive, testifying to the one greater still. The voice from the cloud thundered again. "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." The covenant had reached its turning point. In that moment, Moses' story folded into a greater story. The man who led Israel from slavery pointed now to the one who would free humanity itself. The mediator who ascended Sinai pointed now to the mediator who would ascend a cross. The man who struck a rock so that water might flow gave way to the one whose side would be pierced, from which blood and water would pour. The servant who died outside the land pointed to the son who would die outside the city, bearing curse so that promise might come to all. Moses had become both memory and signpost. His life was a parable of revelation, his death a veil, his reappearance a witness. He was the hinge between the shadow of law and the dawn of fulfillment. And yet, the mystery remained. His grave was still hidden, his body still veiled. It was as though heaven whispered that Moses was not to be worshipped, but to be remembered as a voice pointing forward. His legacy was not a shrine, but a story that opened into eternity. From reeds to rivers, from fire to silence, from mountain to mountain, Moses' journey was never about himself. It was about the God who calls, who delivers, who dwells, who remembers, who finishes what he begins. And so his story stands, ancient yet unspent, awaiting its echo in every generation that still opens the scroll. The figure of Moses became the thread binding heaven and earth in Israel's memory. His name was invoked whenever justice faltered, whenever kings forgot their calling, whenever the people strayed toward idols. He was not merely a leader of the past. He was the yardstick of faithfulness, the echo of covenant in every age. Centuries rolled on, and yet the law he bore at Sinai remained like a living mountain in the center of Israel's life. Prophets rose, each one measuring their visions against the fire that had once engulfed Moses. Some trembled, confessing that they were unclean. Others thundered, declaring that the people had forsaken the law of Moses. Even when exile came, when Jerusalem burned and the temple fell, it was said the disaster had come because they had abandoned his covenant. His shadow stretched into Babylon, into Persia, into Greece, into Rome. The nations, too, came to know his name. In Egypt, memory of the plague still echoed as scars on papyrus. In Babylon, his law was studied with curiosity and fear. In Greece, philosophers marveled at a nation that claimed laws given not by kings but by God. In Rome, his commandments found their way into arguments about justice, order, and conscience. Moses had become not only the father of Israel's covenant, but a figure who unsettled empires. Yet behind the grandeur, there remained a deeper enigma. What did it mean that he had spoken with God face to face? What words were exchanged in the silence of the tent, when cloud descended and all else fell still? What weight pressed upon him when he walked back into the camp, carrying glory veiled in cloth? No text fully reveals it. The mystery remains sealed, like his grave, like the secret conversations in fire and cloud. Legends multiplied. Some said angels had guarded his body, that the archangel contended with the adversary for his remains. Others whispered that he was hidden for the last day, when he would appear again at the threshold of redemption. His story became more than history. It became symbol, prophecy, unfinished sentence. Even in the last book of Scripture, his shadow appears. Plagues echo those of Egypt. Saints sing the song of Moses beside the sea of glass. Law and prophecy find their consummation in the Lamb. It is as though his voice, once heard in Sinai's thunder, still reverberates at the edge of eternity. Moses remains a paradox carved into time. Born under death's decree yet raised in a palace. Called from obscurity yet set against the might of Pharaoh. Giver of law yet breaker of command. Intercessor for rebels yet struck down by his own rebellion. Buried in secret yet revealed in glory. Absent from the land yet present on the mountain of transfiguration. His story is unfinished, stretching beyond himself, beyond his generation, beyond even Israel. For in the mystery of his life and death, in the glow of his face and the silence of his grave, lies a question not yet answered. A question that pierces every generation, waiting at the edge of covenant and promise. The desert winds still seem to carry it, as though whispered across ages. Who will stand between dust and fire? Who will ascend the mountain and live? Who will see the face of God unveiled? The figure of Moses does not end in his death. It lingers like an open scroll, a story still reaching forward, a voice still calling through the veil. The desert wind carries the echo of his name, but it is not the only place his presence lingers. In the songs of Israel, Moses is still there. The psalmist calls him the servant of the Lord, the one who stood in the breach to turn away wrath. His prayer becomes the model of intercession. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Even in worship, his voice guides. His plea shapes the cry of generations. In the synagogues, as scrolls unfurl and words are chanted, it is Moses' Torah that frames the rhythm of life. Each Sabbath, his words return, spoken again as though the man himself still recites them. Parents teach them to their children at dusk and dawn, binding them as signs on hand and forehead, writing them on doorposts. The covenant he bore became the architecture of time itself. Yet mystery still clings to him like a shadow no sun can dissolve. Unlike Abraham, whose tomb is remembered, unlike David, whose city is sung, unlike prophets, whose bones could be traced, Moses is buried by God, hidden in silence. His absence becomes presence. His grave secrecy becomes a reminder that glory belongs to heaven, not to man. That the greatest prophet is not to be enshrined but remembered in story, in word, in covenant. Centuries later, when foreign powers trampled Israel, his memory became both anchor and blade. In times of oppression, the cry rose, "Remember Moses." Leaders invoked his authority to call for repentance, for reform, for courage. Rebels carried his story as banner, believing that just as Moses defied Pharaoh, so too could they defy Rome, or any empire that crushed them. Moses' staff, though long turned to dust, still seemed to strike at the foundations of tyrants. In the mystery of God's design, his image was never silenced. At the Transfiguration, his face shone not with fading glory but with eternal light, standing beside Elijah and before Christ, the lawgiver and the prophet, conversing with the one who embodied law and prophecy both. The veil fell away. The servant stood unveiled in the presence of the sun. Sinai's fire bowed before Tabor's light. But even there, Moses pointed beyond himself. His story never circled back to glorify him. It always bent toward another. The sea he split foreshadowed a greater crossing. The manna he prayed for foreshadowed a greater bread. The covenant he bore foreshadowed a greater promise. The intercession he made foreshadowed a greater mediator. Moses was a beginning, not an end. His life was a shadow cast forward by a greater light yet to rise. Thus, his memory remains double-edged, law and grace, presence and absence, glory and silence. His hidden grave preaches a sermon louder than monuments. No man, however great, holds the center. Only God does. Moses disappears into secrecy so that covenant remains central, so that Israel's gaze turns not to bones but to the living God. And so the question burns, even now, if Moses, who spoke with God face to face, could not enter the land because of disobedience, what hope remains for the rest of us? If even he was buried in mystery, what future waits for those who follow? The riddle remains, like a locked gate at the end of a long road. But every locked gate whispers that a key exists. Every veil implies a moment of unveiling. Every silence hints at a coming voice. The story of Moses is not a relic. It is a prophecy etched into history. A story that refuses to close. A scroll that demands to be read onward. For beyond the wilderness, beyond Nebo, beyond the grave hidden by God, lies the horizon where the final mediator will stand, where the last veil will be torn, and where the face of God will no longer be hidden. The silence of Nebo was not an ending, but a threshold. The generations that followed carried Moses not as a corpse in a tomb, but as a voice echoing from fire. His law became their spine, his covenant their map, his story their mirror. Yet woven into the fabric of that memory was always a tension, a thread of incompleteness. He had seen the land but not entered. He had glimpsed glory but not grasped it. His life was a riddle awaiting its answer. As Israel crossed the Jordan under Joshua, the people knew they walked not only into territory but into a promise Moses had carried. The ark led them, the waters parted, the covenant advanced. But Moses remained behind, a figure watching from eternity. Every stone they stacked, every victory they won, every law they read was haunted by his absence. The man who had begun the journey was not there to finish it. His silence spoke louder than their shouts. Centuries later, prophets returned to his memory like exiles return to their homeland. Jeremiah wept over a nation that had abandoned the law of Moses. Ezekiel thundered against hearts of stone that had forgotten the covenant. Malachi closed the prophetic scroll with this command: "Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave him at Horeb for all Israel." As if the final word before centuries of silence had to be his name, his memory, his covenant. Even when empires shifted, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, Moses remained the immovable mountain in Israel's story. No conqueror could erase him. No fire could burn his words. No exile could silence his covenant. His story was both shield and sword, comfort and terror. It bound the people to their God, even when scattered across the earth. But his mystery continued to trouble hearts. Why did God hide his grave? Why was his story left unfinished? A leader who dies before the victory. Why is his end wrapped in silence rather than triumph? The hiddenness became as loud as revelation. It was as though heaven itself was holding back, refusing closure, leaving a door ajar. Then, in the fullness of time, the echo of Moses returned in strange ways. A prophet arose in the wilderness, crying out beside the Jordan, wearing camel's hair, eating locusts, baptizing multitudes. Many whispered, "Is this the prophet like Moses, the one promised long ago?" When crowds saw miracles, bread multiplied, storms stilled, law taught with authority greater than scribes, the question deepened. Is this the one of whom Moses spoke, the prophet to come? And then on a mountain, the veil lifted. Moses himself appeared, shining, speaking with the Christ. The one who had seen only a glimpse now beheld the fullness. The one who had pleaded to see God's glory was now bathed in it. The unfinished story was no longer incomplete. It had found its answer in the face of the Son. But for the people watching, Peter, James, John, terror and wonder mingled. They wanted to build tents, to freeze the moment, to hold glory in their grasp. Yet the voice thundered again, as it had on Sinai. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Moses had not returned to reclaim his place, but to hand it forward, to point beyond himself to the one who completed what he began. Thus the paradox resolves only in part, like a chord left unresolved at the end of a song. Moses' life still stands as symbol, law given, promise withheld, glory glimpsed, mystery sealed. He is the hinge of revelation, the friend of God whose face shone with reflected light, the intercessor who bore a rebellious people, the servant buried in secrecy. But above all, he is the signpost pointing toward the greater mediator, the one who would not just see promise but embody it, who would not veil his face but unveil the very heart of God. And so the question still rises, what do we do with Moses? Is he only memory, or is he prophecy? Is he merely past, or is he still present, calling across time, pointing to the face that fulfills what his eyes once longed to see? The scroll of Moses is open still. Its ink does not fade, its fire does not cool. The man who spoke with God face to face still speaks, not with new words, but with the enduring weight of a life that refuses to be silenced. The scroll does not close with Moses' silence. It trembles forward, like a torch passed into waiting hands. His name resurfaces again and again wherever covenant and promise are spoken. In synagogues scattered through deserts and cities, his words are still read aloud as though he himself stands behind the reader. In the hearts of the faithful, his story is not past but present, a living reminder that revelation once walked the earth in fire and cloud. Even his failures whisper prophecy. The rock he struck twice, the anger that cost him entry, the grave hidden from sight. These are not mere blemishes but mysteries. They point to a truth larger than him, to the fragility of human flesh, to the need for a mediator greater still. His life is both testimony and warning, that even the greatest prophet is dust before the holy, that even face-to-face communion does not erase the weight of disobedience. And yet his intimacy with God remains unmatched. When the camp trembled, Moses entered the tent. When the mountain blazed, he ascended. When wrath threatened, he interceded. He bore the people not with sword but with prayer, not with tyranny but with covenant. In this, he became more than leader. He became bridge. Dust reaching toward flame, flame stooping to dust. Legends continued to circle around him. Some rabbis whispered that in the last days, Moses would return to lead again. Others said his hidden grave meant he was not fully gone, that heaven kept him for an hour still to come. Even the final visions of Scripture, in the book of Revelation, seem to recall him, plagues like Egypt's, a sea split and stilled, saints singing the song of Moses beside the throne. His shadow falls across the very end of history, as though the first mediator will stand as witness to the last unveiling. The paradox of Moses cannot be contained. He is lawgiver, yet breaker of command. He is prophet, yet barred from promise. He is buried in silence, yet speaks in glory. He is past, yet future. His life becomes symbol, a living riddle written by God across time. And so the people who hear his story must reckon with it. They must ask why God chose one so frail, why glory was given and withheld, why the greatest prophet was left with an unfinished ending. The answer lies not in Moses himself, but in the one to whom he pointed. The man who split seas pointed to the one who would still storms. The man who gave manna pointed to the bread of life. The man who raised a serpent in the wilderness pointed to the one who would be lifted up for healing. The man who died outside the land pointed to the one who would die outside the city. Moses was always a shadow of something greater. His story was never meant to end with him, but to direct eyes forward, toward the final mediator, the true covenant, the unveiled glory. That is why his grave is hidden. That is why his face was veiled. That is why his story is unfinished. For he himself is not the destination. He is the signpost carved into the wilderness, pointing toward the horizon where the ultimate revelation would come. And so his memory lingers, heavy with mystery, alive with fire. The man who spoke with God face to face still stands at the edge of every soul's horizon, asking the question that cannot be ignored. Who will you follow through the wilderness? Whose voice will you heed when the mountain burns? Whose covenant will you cling to when the desert stretches long? The silence of his grave is not emptiness. It is invitation. A pause before the final word. A shadow waiting for light. The desert scroll closes, and with it the tale of Moses bows into silence. Yet silence is not the end, it is the threshold. For the man who spoke with God face to face, who bore a nation through seas and storms, whose grave is hidden by the hand of heaven, still stands as a mirror for all who listen. His life is a question mark carved into history, and that question does not vanish with his burial. Look at him, born under death's decree, yet preserved in a reed basket, raised in palaces, yet chosen for shepherds' fields, shaper of nations, yet undone by a moment's anger. If Moses could not enter the land, what hope for any of us? If even he faltered at the edge of promise, how shall dust and frailty cross the river? And yet, here is the mystery. Moses' incompleteness is not despair but signpost. His hidden grave is not silence but summons. For his story does not invite us to worship him. It compels us to lift our eyes beyond him, to the greater mediator, the one who fulfills what Moses could only foreshadow, the one who enters not only the land but the heavens themselves, carrying covenant written not on stone but on living hearts. So now the desert turns to you. You are not standing at Sinai, but your life knows wilderness. You are not climbing Nebo, but your eyes have seen promises from afar. And the question that hovered over Moses now presses against your soul. Will you choose fear or faith? Will you wander in circles or step toward promise? Will you cling to idols of memory or walk with the God who dwells in fire and cloud? The invitation is clear, sharp as thunder, gentle as dawn. Step out of Egypt's shadow. Refuse the golden calf of your own making. Lift your eyes to the horizon where covenant waits. Do not veil your face in fear, for the glory that once shone on Moses now shines unveiled in the one who calls you. History has spoken. The scroll is unrolled. The law has thundered. But the story waits for a response. Not from Moses, not from prophets long gone, but from you. The fire still burns. The covenant still calls. The God of Moses is the God who remembers, who forgives, who leads, who fulfills. And tonight, in this moment, the question is no longer ancient. It is alive. It is yours. Will you stand on the side of noise and shadow, or on the side of covenant and light? The choice is before you. The wilderness stretches behind. The promise stretches ahead. The scroll is open, waiting for your name to be written within its lines. The man of God lies hidden in a grave no one can find. But the God of Moses is not hidden. He calls you now. The story is not finished until you answer.